From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
It's the new Horrorween for 2024.
All right, welcome back. My name is John. We're going to ask you to go ahead and smash that like and subscribe button. This is the Dewey Pod Monster podcast. This is your weekly podcast about consumption. We're proud members of the You Run Podcast Network. If you go to yourunpodcast.com, you can smash it there, subscribe and like button as well. But you can also find all of our previous episodes as well as all the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network. With me this week is the Wrath of Sean. Sean, how are you doing today?
Hey, in true douchetuber fashion, I'm going to have a new GoPro review going up this week.
I was actually really hoping you would come on with a GoPro taped to your head. That would have been pretty funny.
I don't think I have the head mount. I have a lot of other ones, though.
Wow.
The pelvic mount, I have that one.
You know, if it's one thing I learned this week, it's that duct tape can fix just about anything. You could have made it work.
I've heard that a lot.
Sean, what have you been watching this week?
Well, I'll start with something that I don't think that you've watched. I've watched a 3-hour thing or 3-episode thing that I think you watched.
I might have watched it.
Yeah, so I figure I'll save that for when you talk about it, or we can talk about it together. But I watched, there's a YouTube channel that I've kind of been falling down the rabbit hole. It's called Channel Surfer, and that's Serfer. And they have done these retrospectives. I don't know if a retrospective is the real or the right phrase to use, but the one that I watched was the downfall of Trimark Pictures, and Trimark was kind of a straight to VHS B-movie studio house that I think they helped distribute a lot of stuff.
Remember their logo kind of got that like Greek dude for the logo, right?
That's a lion. I think it used to be called something else.
What's the one I'm thinking of? It's got the dude with the like elf-looking shoes, and I can't think of his actual character name.
Tingle.
There we go. Tingle Pictures. Anyway.
But yeah, so they did a lot of B-movie and VHS stuff, and then they started distributing theatrical movies. So Leprechaun was one of theirs, Warlock. They did a bunch of indie titles when indie titles started to get big because they were making money doing that. They were kind of losing money doing the direct-to-theater horror kind of stuff. And then they had success with indie films, so they decided we're going to go all in and do indie films all the time, because that was like huge in the 90s, right? Late 90s. And they lost a shit ton of money. So they, in the late 90s, early 2000s, I guess they tried to show films online when there was not really infrastructure to do that. You know, so they're showing clips of people watching movies on Real Player and all that garbage.
Oh, jeez.
They eventually got bought out by Lionsgate. So now they're just part of Lionsgate, and they got phased out. So not really any big revelation there about Trimark Pictures, but they have he has a few videos on different studios like that you would see the title card on all the VHS movies and all the video store throwaway shit that we love. So it kind of fell in our wheelhouse a little bit. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to pick up, talk about. Other than that, I guess I'll jump in. I watched all 3 episodes of Nothing But a Good Time, the uncensored story of 80s hair metal, which is directed by Jackass's Jeff Tremaine. And it's about 80s hair metal. It's 3 episodes.
I also watched that because I'm never one to turn down a good hair metal docuseries or documentary. I don't know what that counts as. Series, documentary, whatever.
Just documentary. Yeah. Now you're making me say it the wrong way. Biopic.
I actually like the way Jeff Tremaine does these kind of films when he does them, because I'm trying to remember what the other one is that he did, because he did do the Motley Crue movie, but that's not like this at all.
Yeah, The Dirt, based on the book.
But he did another one that, maybe it's just because I'm used to seeing him do the behind the scenes stuff with the Jackass thing, but him doing these like candid interviews with people from that scene is, I don't know if he relates to them or he just has a way of relating to them that works good for maybe these subjects just like opening up to this guy because he's a fucking nut just like they are. But I don't know. I kind of felt like what he chose to feature, because it kind of felt like he went through like, all right, this first one, we're going to talk primarily about Motley Crue with like some other bands kind of sprinkled in. The second one, if I'm remembering right, it felt like it was mostly Poison.
Yeah, a lot of Poison.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple other bands sprinkled in. And then the last one was kind of like a mix of like what came after hair and glam metal. So it started talking about Ozzy, and I think Warrant was Quiet Riot was one of the bands they were talking about in the 3rd episode. So they talk about a lot of the bands that like you know whether you're a fan of hair metal or not because they were so huge, like Poison, Rat, and so on. I would have liked to have seen him do a little bit more of a deep dive and talk about some of the bands that maybe didn't quite break the mainstream, maybe some of the bands that were kind of still in squalor, as opposed to just like the ones that got huge. But for what he put together and what really works out to about 2.5 hours worth of documentary footage, I thought he did all right with it. I don't feel the need to hear Steve-O talking about it again. I thought that was kind of shoehorned in, but other than that,
I liked it, but I like stuff like the Downfall of Western Civilization series that Penelope Spheris did. I think that part 2
so much better
is just a much better, much well done, a better done just movie in general, because she talks to more people, talks to people of the time.
She's in this one, isn't she?
Yeah, they interview her. I just wanted them to be a little bit more in depth, and it felt very much like this was just more of a surface level kind of entertainment thing, more than like an investigation or kind of telling you about the history. And I knew as soon as I saw like the little animated, whatever, like pieces, that it was going to be real fluffy, because that was just, they talk about the first episode was a lot about Motley Crue, but a lot about kind of like because Motley Crue was, they get signed in like 82 or something, really early.
Something like that. Yeah, they were talking
and
about...
they kind of talk about Wasp and all those like real proto hair metal things, and they talk about a lot of bands that aren't really hair metal, but like I don't really consider Guns N' Roses necessarily to be hair metal, but I guess they are in a way.
I always thought they were like the precursor to thrash, but they weren't edgy enough to be thrash, so they were Guns N' Roses. Like,
yeah,
that's another one that they spent a good amount of time talking about was Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, LA Guns and
near the end.
Guns N' Roses. They really very lightly hint at how grunge ate their lunch, like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, all that stuff really, and Soundgarden really ate their lunch, but they kind of just gloss over it real quick. And that was kind of my complaint with a lot of the things in the series, is that they just gloss over so much and they focus so much time on talking to Jack Russell from Great White, who just recently passed away. And, just little stories about that. I don't know why Corey Taylor's in here. He will pretty much...
Yeah.
Corey Taylor feels to me like...
he's kind of like the Joe Bob Briggs of the metal scene.
He'll just show up to anything to give a supporting opinion. If you tell him like, hey, man, talk about eating shit. And he'll be like, oh, eating shit's the best, man. Nobody's eaten shit like this before. It's got to have, raisins in it, and it's got to have some corn. And once you got all that stuff, the shit tastes great. It's like, dude, no one agrees with you that shit tastes good. But Corey Taylor will. Like, I don't know the guy. I don't have anything against him. I'm just saying he shows up on these things that we've seen. We talked about In Search of Darkness, and I don't know if he's
been on some of the wrestling stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if he's on the In Search of Tomorrow sci-fi doc, but he'll just show up for anything.
I don't remember if he's on that one, or I want to say he is, but because a lot of those, like, you could tell they just kind of shot him at the same time, or it looks like they probably just shot him at the same time. I'd be interested to know, like, if there was a poll that reached more people than our audience, because I feel like our audience might be kind of biased on this. Like, if you just ask the general population, where do you know Corey Taylor from? I wonder how many of them would say Slipknot, and how many of them would say, who the fuck is this guy? Like, I honestly wonder, like, I know Corey Taylor is the lead singer of Slipknot, and doesn't he have another band too that's moderately popular, Stone something or other?
You know more than me.
Okay, but I wonder how, because Slipknot does the whole, like, don't they still do the big costume and the jumpsuit thing, or is that something they grew out of? I don't know. I know Guar still does it.
Your guess is as good as mine.
So I'm going to just say, for the sake of argument, that they still wear the mask and all that stuff. I wonder how many people actually know the person behind the mask that knows who Slipknot. Like, even if you just took Slipknot fans and said, who's this guy? Like, how many of them are going to actually know that?
Oh, like show a picture of him without a mask and be like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
Do you know this guy? Yeah, so that's really all I watch.
I do think Corey Taylor in that too. He also has a little bit of a, like, I just drank like a whole keg of beer the night before. Like, he's kind of like hunched over and like talking down into a mic the whole time. Like, kind of party was this guy at before you recorded this? So
a good one.
Yeah. I don't even know what channel that's actually on now, but when I saw it pop up, I was like, well, this seems like I really just was kind of looking for something that wasn't football to watch, because I was like, yeah, talk about something other than football eventually. That's what I landed on.
It's on Paramount Plus.
Is it? Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, I heard a Jeff Tremaine interview, and he basically said it was a good thing they got on Paramount Plus, because then they would get rights to play the music.
Makes sense.
Because that's MTV. It's an MTV Presents or
subsidiary
MTV
or
Films or whatever, the beginning with the spaceman who plants the flag.
Yeah, that's not always the best selling. Like, speaking of movie title cards, when I see that, I usually have, unless I'm going to see a Beavis and Butthead or a Jackass movie, I'm usually like, this is probably going to go bad quickly. So yeah, the only other thing I watched, though, I watched the Thanksgiving classic Blood Rage, which I was doing a little research for our Frankensteins. I'm, pending approval from the other half of this show. I have a feeling this might be a good option for Thanksgiving this year because the movie is fucking ridiculous in all the best ways.
I think a lot of movies that have rage in the title are just good. Like Blind Rage is a great movie with Chuck Norris. Blood Rage, Primal Rage. That's a big favorite of mine.
Have you seen Blood Rage?
I have not.
Have we talked about this?
So I haven't seen it.
It had been a long time, and without spoiling anything, because I think if we're going to do it at Frankenstein, there should be an accompanying episode with it, because why not? We haven't done it yet. Lives up to the title. We'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Well, I'll look forward to watching it.
Well, good. So for those listening to this, you have, November after Horrorween to look forward to that, I guess.
You've been warned.
Yeah, that's right. Find another podcast now. Preferably one on the You Run Podcast Network.
Hell, I don't care. We're not getting paid if you listen to somebody else. We're not getting paid if you listen to this, frankly. But
with that in mind, we're going to take a quick break and tell you about someone on the You Run Podcast Network, and then we'll be back to talk about the movie Deadstream. Hey, this is John, and I am excited to tell you about another exciting podcast that you can find on the You Run Podcast Network. If you like spooky stuff, then check out the Paranormal Misfits podcast. This podcast features your favorite besties diving fearlessly into the paranormal, uncovering mysterious phenomena, unraveling mind-bending conspiracies, and sharing their thoughts on all things horror. Head over to yourunpodcast.com now and check out the Paranormal Misfits podcast, as well as all the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network. I hope you enjoyed those ads. Maybe you found your next favorite podcast. That would be great. But you're still here listening to us for the moment. Sorry about that. We're going to talk about the movie Deadstream. Deadstream is a movie that came out in 2022, and we start our movies with a third-party review. And I'm going to start this third-party review segment with this asshole named Jacob, who gives this movie 1 out of 5 stars. And he says, the people that have given this enough praise to get it a 91% on the tomato meter have never seen a horror movie before. Looks like it was made with Party City costumes and makeup done by your mom. If you're an actual horror movie buff, don't bother with this movie. If you want to show a horror movie, quote, quote, to your kids, this is it. 1 out of 5 tomatoes, which I think I'm highlighting this because Jacob's kind of a dick. Even if everything he said in there is accurate, which we'll get to that, whether we feel that way or not. It's not the way to be talk about a movie. Let people make their own fucking decision up. Don't start shitting on it before they even watch it.
This movie is shit. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, I thought we were talking about our opinion. Sorry.
Well, we can save that to the end. We can call, if you get to the end of the conversation, then we can call it whatever we want. With that in mind, Sean, what is this? What is Deadstream about?
Well, I do want to bring up, we didn't mention it at all. This is the second movie of our Horrorween 2024 lineup following A Nightmare on Elm Street. I almost said A Nightmare Before Elm Street, thinking of mixing up a couple different titles here. But anyways, so to go and figure out what this movie's all about, we go to IMDB, where we read about the storyline and the plot. This week, I can definitely certifiably tell you that they are exactly the same, and I'm going to read them right now. It says, first off, this has a 6.4 out of 10 with 19,000 ratings. And it says, a disgraced internet personality attempts to win back his followers by live streaming one night alone in a haunted house. But when he accidentally upsets a vengeful spirit, his big comeback event becomes a real-time fight for his life.
Sounds about right. Sean, who's in this movie? Who directed it? All that kind of stuff.
This movie was directed by Joseph and Vanessa Winter, which I'm assuming they are a couple. It stars Joseph Winter, who, before seeing this movie, I had never seen this guy ever, but I guess he's in VHS 99 and some short movies. I don't recognize. High School Musical 2, which is not High School the Musical. No, I guess it is. Okay, we'll scratch that. And we have...
Why not Return to Horror High School Musical 2?
Yeah.
I haven't seen a horror musical in a while.
That's it. That's the ticket. And then we have really the only other person, because it's a really light cast. There are a few people, like side people, that I don't recognize whatsoever. They could just be actual real people, which I'm sure they are. The other person that is in this movie is Chrissy, who is played by Melanie Stone. Melanie Stone is known for Deadstream, of course, VHS 99, another movie that our buddy Joseph Winter is in, and looks like some other kind of minor things like Cupid for Christmas. So all good things.
Talk about that.
Yeah, that'll be our February movie, or Christmas.
We'll pair it with Bayou Christmas or whatever.
Yeah, My Southern Family Christmas. That'll be a good counterpart, which we have about 30 listens to.
Whoa, all right. We're getting up there.
Moving on up.
I know you've heard a little bit about this movie because if you go back whenever it was last year, this was my favorite movie that I saw last year, even though I caught a year after the fact. So I've already kind of played my hand on this one in particular. Did you really know much about this other than knowing that I enjoyed it before you went into it?
I knew you enjoyed it, so I knew that meant I would hate it. No, I knew that really all I knew is from the poster. It's like a claw clutching a GoPro, essentially. And I knew it was something about a live streamer. I did want to throw in, before we start to dive in, this movie is available for free on Hoopla. It's leaving in 15 days as of time of this recording. So by the time you listen to it, it might be pretty close to being gone. Yeah, but you can rent it on all the major services. And this was a Shudder original, was it not?
Yes.
So you can watch it on Shudder. If you have Shudder, it's on there. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I didn't really know much about it other than the GoPro part of it. And then it was kind of about a live streamer, YouTuber kind of dude, and that you liked it. I remember you said you liked it, and it was a movie that I meant to watch. I just hadn't watched it yet.
So I'm trying to think where we want to start with this. So I guess we'll start with some of the positive stuff on this. So this is a found footage movie, I guess. I mean, I'm starting to feel like the term found footage, like the further away we get from the Blair Witch Project, the more I feel like found footage is just like
a derogatory term.
It's not even that. I feel like the genre has come so far at this point, like from what the Blair Witch Project was to what a quote unquote found footage movie is now, that when the Blair Witch Project came out, I don't know if it was the first of its kind, but it was the first movie I saw like that. It was the first movie that really pushed that whole POV shot on video, but like good kind of angle. And we're not talking like shot on video, like, Black Devil Doll from Hell shot on video. We're talking like
Emasculator shot on video.
Yeah. Perfect.
Not that.
Yeah. But when you look at I think we talked about Late Night with the Devil could be considered a found footage movie, which that's got a lot of, professional look to it. And that's a very, very different type of movie than what this is. So this being a found footage movie, as far as what they're calling it, I'm not sure that I entirely know what that means anymore. But what I like about this for this type of movie, one of the things that right off the bat that's really clever about it, I think this movie does a lot of things that are pretty clever as it progresses through the storytelling. Right off the bat, they explain why there's cameras here in the first place. Like a lot of movies where you look at the idea of the streamer went into this haunted house and never came back. This is his footage. This takes right out the gate. It says, this is why the camera's on this guy. This is why the cameras are following around. And it actually makes the whole aspect of watching this, live stream or this potential found footage type camera shot movie. It almost makes the cameras a character within the film as opposed to just being something that's there that they had to explain away with there were some students out doing a documentary and they got murdered and shit. I feel like it does a better job of explaining why we're watching this in the first place.
I don't want to be a actually push up my glasses kind of guy, but this isn't technically found footage because it was all live streaming. So there was an audience watching it while he was doing it. So it couldn't have been lost. But
sure.
I like that this movie it's like a combination.
I meant that more as like a genre tag, but whatever.
I know. Like I said, I had to be the actually guy. I like that the movie mixes the FPV, the first person footage, first person video with that kind of found footage. And I agree with you. This is kind of along the lines of found footage, even if it is streaming. I like that it had that angle to it. It was kind of a new, fresh take because, you think of something like Blair Witch and that is 3 people. One person had a camera, or you think of something like Cloverfield with the TJ Miller stuff. He's recording the whole thing. This is like this guy, Sean, Wrath of Sean, is filming himself. So we get to see him holding a camera the camera pointing at him, and then cameras that he puts up around the house that the audience can switch and back and forth to. So I just kind of thought that was a really cool element. And the basic story, like we said before, this guy has a YouTube channel, or he has an online presence where he's kind of like a prank video kind of guy. And he is famous for facing his fears. That's what these pranks are about, doing challenges or whatever, running from the cops or being smuggled across the border.
I really like the Baby Moses challenge where he put himself in a raft and
went down the rapids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was demonetized from the platform. They don't really talk. I don't think they really specify why, but he's come back after his copyright strike or whatever the issue was that got him taken off or demonetized. He decides to challenge himself to stay in this Death Manor, this confirmed haunted house, essentially overnight. And the condition is that he disables his car. He throws the spark plugs out in the woods. He throws the spark plug wrench out in the woods. He locks himself in this house. And the only condition is if he sees or hears something suspicious, he has to check it out. And it doesn't take very long. The first, I'd say probably 20 minutes to 30 minutes is him kind of laying down the ground rules of, he's explaining about the house, what the legend is, why people say it's haunted, exploring some of the rooms and telling you some history about it. And then it really starts to take off when all of a sudden someone else shows up at the house, Chrissy. And Chrissy is at first described as this kind of fangirl who's a big fan of Sean's. And she found out where he's streaming, so she comes to join him and help him out. And it quickly, as we always say, hilarity ensues quickly after that.
I want to put a pin in it there and
put a pin in it
to where you're at with it. So one, they don't go into a lot of this Sean. Now I'm going to say this Sean because you're also Sean.
I am.
So I don't confuse myself.
Okay.
You are.
Thanks for letting me know.
They do a good job of building up the character of this Sean in the 30 minutes of dicking around that they do leading up to when Chrissy enters. They don't go into oh, this is my wife, these are my kids, any of that type of shit. But they do it's funny. The first time I watched this movie, I've only watched it twice now, but the first time I watched it, I'm this guy is annoying as shit. He's a real piece of cunt. I don't like him, so on and so on. And that's all true. He is a typical
douchetuber,
dorky, clickbaity type YouTube / TikTok, pick your platform type of guy. But they do a good job of making him so eccentric and so over the top with it that although he's very obnoxious, I find him funny because he's playing into a stereotype. He's playing in his character is that idiot, that doucher that you're if I were watching this guy on a YouTube channel, I think I would have been all right, let's go find something else. Making a character out of this guy and where this movie goes after, I'm all right, that was kind of genius that they made him this dumb, clueless, and borderline helpless. And they do a really good job of just kind of, he's one of those characters that this movie is going to get compared to, maybe not as much as some other places have, but this movie is an easy comparison to the Evil Dead franchise with Ash, because he's a lot like Ash in that he has the ability to, as soon as he shows up wherever he's going, he starts to dig a hole, and at no real point does he ever dig himself out of the said hole, but somehow he still manages to come out on top of it by the end of it. He goes all the way around the earth and ends up back at top where he started.
Well, he's a very endearing character. And like you said, if this was something that I was actually watching on Twitch or Livid, which is a platform that he's on, or YouTube or whatever, I would not have stuck around long enough to figure out that he was endearing and charismatic. But I mean, when the movie starts, you're God, this guy is such a cock. I cannot wait until he gets his, however he gets it. And then you kind of, something happens, the tables start to turn, and he's such a silly idiot that you kind of can't help but kind of root for him and cheer a little bit for him when things start going his way. And that's another element to kind of talk about things that I liked about the movie, is that it's a horror movie, but it's also comedic, and it's not
very funny.
It's not slapstick comedy. It's not haha, look, did you see what I just did? Kind of funny. It's just the things that are said. There's this whole audience interaction, this chat that's going on with the live stream. So he's reading comments, and you can see other comments going by. People in the audience are hey, did you see this thing on this other camera you set up? Hey, this is something that might be able to help you out. Oh no, that looks creepy. Just stuff in the background. Did you see what happened on this camera? And it makes him rewind it and go watch, and you start to unravel elements of the story via the audience. So it's a nice touch that they keep it humorous and pretty much, the entire time. I mean, there's parts where you're just like, God, you're such a fucking wimp. Like, just step up a little bit. But other times you're like, no, this is hilarious at the same time.
That also, I'm not saying that plays to a level of realism that I like, him being an idiot and a wimp and all these things. And I'm not saying this movie's realistic, but the way that he responds to things that happen in this movie, we should probably say spoilers because, we'll go into stuff that actually does happen in this movie eventually. But the way that he responds to things, especially when like shit really starts going nuts in the movie, it's much more realistic in the sense that I think if most people encountered ghosts or demons or deadites or whatever these things are that are coming after him, I think you'd have a lot more reactions that are closer to what this guy does than what, Arnold Schwarzenegger would do in Predator. I think you'd have a lot more like idiots like screaming like a bitch, running through the house to this perceived safe space and going under like this filthy blanket and being like, oh my God, did you see that? That's so like, I think that's a lot more accurate to what the majority of people would do, as opposed to just instantly turning into movie badass and like brandishing like, oh, now I have a chainsaw in one hand and machete in the other. Let's go. Like, I don't think that's what's going to happen for most people. I think most people are going to have a calamity of events that unfold more similar to this than if there were the alternative. And I think that actually, one, it works out for the comedy in this movie because it blends in seamlessly. Like, you really do, like, there's all these horrible things happening, but the way this guy kind of Three Stooges and idiots his way through it is genuinely funny. And it does kind of endear you to the character more because it's not, it's fictional, but it's not so fictional that you're like, okay, well, he's obviously just going to go Rambo his way out of this situation again, Yeah, it is realistic to a point. I mean, I would say, like you said, I think a lot of people in a situation like this are going to react very much like he does. I think me personally, I would have been finding something to jump out of long before he does, and just like, oh, I can't find my spark plugs because I was a fucking idiot and threw them out in the woods. I'm just running down the road. Like, I'm out of here. But sure, same.
Yeah, it's just kind of a funny turn of events, everything that kind of happens. And I don't know, when you start to like, when we start to get into the actual things that happen after, when we start to get into spoiler territory, let's put it that way. Do you want to just start getting into it now?
Well, yeah, we're going to start working into that. But some of the other things that I found to be really clever in this, though, and this is one thing you'd say that's kind of a spoiler, I guess, because I think it's funnier if you don't know about it ahead of time. I love how they introduced the score in this movie. And by score, I mean like the actual music that's supposed to be setting the tone in this movie. So that's one thing. I don't know if this has ever been done in another found footage style movie. If it has, I'm not aware of it. But for those who aren't aware, this dude just brings like a little Walkman that has a speaker and just starts hitting play whenever he needs to fill some dead air with music. I think it's clever and genius in a way because, well, now you've just explained away why this is happening in the first place. Not that, like, I think most people, when they hear a score in a movie, whether it's a found footage movie or not, they just kind of don't think about it too much because it's a movie and that's what you're used to hearing. But the fact that they took the 2 seconds to explain it and put it in a way that makes sense for the movie, I think that's a little really creative, good, really smart writing and a good way to introduce that element into the story.
I'm trying to think, you brought it up and now I'm trying to think if I'm like, my biggest experience with found footage, as I mentioned before, is probably Cloverfield, but even more so Blair Witch. I don't think Blair Witch has any music in it, but still, I do agree with you. I think it's clever that he has this tape recorder that he's like playing tapes and he'll flip the tape over at certain times and all this other stuff. The thing I'm kind of astonished with this movie is that he expects to stay there all night. And I don't know how long of a time frame the movie's supposed to take place over, but yeah, I mean, number one, just elephant in the room, like maybe not elephant in the room. I don't believe in ghosts, but I am definitely creeped out in the dark in general. And maybe it's because of all these movies that I watch
in this house for sure. This house is creepy as shit.
Your house?
No, usually not.
What if you turn off all the lights in your basement? Do you like I have slats on my basement steps. You're near the door by your basement. I am too. Yeah. But I have slats in my basement steps and a crawl space. I will run up these stairs. I'm a 40-plus-year-old man, and I will run up these stairs because I think somebody's going to grab my ankles every time I walk up. So I am very much a scaredy cat when it comes to the dark. But yeah,
I don't know how
under
long
my
stairs too, but they don't have the slats under them.
I don't know how long this movie's supposed to take place, but he's going to have a lot of tapes. He's going to be rewinding quite a bit to fill in some air.
Yeah, I don't believe in ghosts either, but I do find, like, I think they did a good job. Supposedly the house they're in is actually haunted, for whatever that's worth. I think they did a good job of finding a real dilapidated house that looks like, whether it's haunted or not, obviously it can look the part. Like, the house is basically a character in this movie.
Oh, for sure.
At least everything that comes about inside of it. And I think part of why I like how this house looks is it's not just the idea that the house is haunted. It's that obviously other people are aware of this house. Like, they put the drug needles in there, so there's graffiti and stuff in there. So it's not like he's the only person who's found this house. And I know behind the scenes, this house is getting broken into all the time while they were working on this movie, which is kind of funny. But I'd almost be, if I were in his situation, I'd almost be more terrified of whatever junkies coming through the door to shoot up that night than I would whatever perceived ghosts might or might not be in the house. Until the ghosts actually show up, then you have a whole different problem.
And one thing I didn't even think of that I want to bring up is that the way this movie is presented, because it is like a streaming situation, it feels very much like a one cut movie as well, because the way that they just transition from maybe the camera turning around, it feels like the whole thing just takes place in one continuous cut. There are times when it blacks out for a second or two or a minute or two. There's times when, they'll cut to a different camera angle that he's set up, and he sets up all these assorted cameras around the house that, like I said, the streaming audience can switch between all these cameras and see things that are happening that he can't see.
I still think, again, we'll go ahead and say big spoiler here. My favorite use of all these extra cameras.
Spoiler territory.
There's two that really stick out, but I love the foreshadowing when he puts the motion camera up at the beginning of the movie, and watching it, I'm like, I don't remember how that comes into play, but I know that's foreshadowing something. When they cut back to the motion camera outside and all you see is him falling out of the window from the second story, I laughed my ass off so hard at that.
Yeah, it's really well done.
It is. It's not like a movie character, like an action movie fall. It's like very much so like this doofus was running away and fell out a window, and it looks great because it's all like shitty, like night vision, like black and white shot, and you hear him like as he does it. It's fucking wonderful. I also like the when he seemingly has an endless supply of GoPros because he keeps pulling them out and putting them on new things,
duct taping them up.
When he is eventually trapped in a place and tries using the GoPro to like look around the corner, and he tapes it to the salami and calls it beef cam or whatever, and is just the fact that he took the time to name it beef cam, the fact that through this whole ordeal he's still cognitive of the stream that he's doing and doing things that clearly would be decisions you would make to try to engage your streaming audience as all this insanity is going on. It's possibly the most unbelievable part of this, but also one of the best like parts of character development that you get for this guy, because it shows how fucking nuts he really is.
Well, I think one of the most unbelievable parts is that he has millions of people watching him. I think that's kind of a little bit of a stretch. And that he has good Wi-Fi the entire time, good network connectivity to be able to stream this stuff.
I know they explained how the house actually got Wi-Fi like in real life, but they never really explained that in the movie. I was like, I mean, I guess you could hotspot off a cell phone, but like, I don't know, man. You look like you're pretty out in the middle of fucking nowhere. I'd be surprised if you could upload video live at a good quality through 8-9 cameras at the that seems unlikely to me.
Yeah, a little bit of a stretch.
Right. So you mentioned Chrissy shows up. Chrissy is this fan / we don't know what, obviously something like you're lured into like liking her because she's a young attractive woman, but at the same time, like the longer she's on screen, the more you realize something's kind of up with her. Then you find out something is up with her. What are your thoughts on Chrissy, the only other human in this movie?
You said it basically in a nutshell right there. She shows up. She's attractive. She's younger. I wouldn't say she's young, but she's presented as young, I guess.
She looks like she's like 22 to 25-ish.
I think the actress is probably considerably older, but yes, she
I think that's what they're presenting her as.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, she presents as a young 20-something. She's kind of wants to help him out, but she's also she provides a bit of levity. She kind of is like a pressure release from all this tension being built up from him going through this house alone, and you don't ever really know what to expect. There's a scene in particular I'm thinking of where he's saying in this particular room, Corner Man is one of the ghosts, and he keeps holding up the tablet to look at the picture, and then he'll bring the tablet down to show what is actually in the corner of this room. And he's expecting, and you're expecting as an audience, because they've set you up for this, that you're going to see the ghost in the corner. One of these times he pulls the tablet down and it never shows up. So there's all this tension that's being built up, and then Chrissy kind of shows up out of nowhere, which also is kind of freaky because you hear like footsteps and all these noises and stuff going on around the house.
And he has the door padlocked shut at this point.
Yeah. So like, how do they get in? You know, all this stuff. Whoever's in here, is it a ghost or whatnot? And then she kind of shows up out of nowhere and scares them. But yeah, it's a nice kind of break, but you start to, I mean, for me, I was like immediately suspicious of this character, like you said.
Sure. You have to be.
The door's locked, padlocked. How did anybody get in unless they climbed in through an upper window or broke in somehow?
Well, even if she's not what she turns into, if I'm afraid of junkies and whoever else might be coming in this house, the attractive woman that seemingly is your like super fan that knows where you're at when you haven't told anyone, that might be more terrifying than the ghost. Sean sounding. So,
could be.
The nod of Sean. So eventually we do get ghosts and stuff that start to show up. And this is the ghosts that you have. I kind of like that there's this weird hodgepodge of different ghosts and different effects. Like you get some ghosts that look very undead, zombie, kind of Evil Dead-like, kind of walking around and strolling around. You have some that are just kind of computer generated, like ghostly figures that kind of look like a cloud of dust that happen to be sort of kind of human shaped.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a couple other little creatures that are like very, think like Spirit USA, but a little bit better type creature. Has a head in his stomach for some reason, like those types of things.
Quados walking around.
Yeah, those types of whatnots. But I kind of like how, although there's really no rhyme or reason to the ghosts that you get in here, like none of them feel necessarily out of place at the same time.
No, they don't. They all are very disparate and different, but cohesive at the same time, which is just kind of weird.
Yeah. Like you would think you would either have like the invisible floaty ghosts or you would have the like demons or whatever. Never really get that.
Yeah, impish kind of characters dancing around and chanting and whatnot, but there's just a good mix of them. You get some of those too. How
did you feel about the effects that we get in this movie? Do you think they are shit or...
I thought overall they were pretty good. I didn't really have any big complaints on them. I mean, there were things, like you said, you could tell some of them were a little bit rubber masky, or maybe there's one guy in particular, I think he's the sheriff, that shows up and he gets killed with like a potato gun, or I don't know how they take like physical damage when they're ghosts, but he takes physical damage and dies. And when the actor, the person in the makeup is like flopping around and stuff, it looks great. And then he kills him and you can tell they switched that with like a rubber, maybe not a rubber, but like a polyfoam dummy or something, and it becomes very floppy, but it still looks pretty good. Like, you know, all things considered, they look pretty good in general. So there's a scene, again, spoilers abound, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it. So as we learn...
You've been warned at this point.
Yes, go watch the movie if you're interested in not hearing spoilers. If you don't mind spoilers, listen on. We find out in short order that Chrissy is Mildred. Mildred is the woman who owned the house. She was a poet. She ended up hanging herself because her husband was killed. Or was he killed? Is that what happened? He got killed?
Sure. I don't remember. Doesn't really matter. She's a ghost.
Yeah, she wanted to start a family, so what she does
She's the Beetlejuice of this universe, basically.
Yeah, pretty
She's
much.
The ghost with the most.
So you find out that Chrissy is Mildred, and there's a scene where on the camera, Sean can see that Mildred has hung herself, because that's what she did. The ghost has hung herself, and he can't see it with his eyes. He can only see it on the camera. And once Mildred shows up, all the shit goes nuts. Like, everything's on the table. Anything can show up. It's going to show up anywhere. I just like that effect that, I mean, it's not like it's a real effect of any consequence, but it's just like differing footage that he can't see, but it's like it exists there. And that was a nice kind of thing where it's like, it's basically invisible. He'll turn around and it'll be like in his face. I thought the makeup effects, specifically when it was makeup, was really well done.
So I liked any of the blood effects. I thought the way they did blood and chunks and pus, there's scenes where they do blood or pus or anything. There's a scene specifically where I think it's a face that blows up or something, and he gets all this like white chunks in his face and in his beard that really...
It's like pink.
It's really fucking gross.
Yeah, it's gross. I just wanted him to wipe his face the whole time.
Yeah, I know. And he never does. So there's a lot of spots where it's like the effects aren't necessarily scary, but they are pretty gross, and that's almost just as good. In regards to Mildred, I do like that there's a lot of scenes where if you're looking around in the background of what's going on, even if he can't see her, we, the audience, can see like her feet going into the ceiling, like where she might have been hanging herself again or whatever. Or you can see her kind of scurrying off in the background. Once the ghosts start to show up, even when they're not on screen, they do a good job of making you feel like they're around somewhere. So especially on a second watch, I found myself going a lot more like what's going on in this little corner of the house, looking for all the stuff, whatever might be tucked away in the background. And it does deliver some of that. And I don't know why, but I really enjoyed and laughed at this Mildred specifically has this real like fetish with shoving her nose up finger up Sean's nose.
Yeah. Jagged fingernail.
Yeah. I don't know why, but especially the first time when she does it and then she leaves her fingernail in his nose and he pulls it out like 5 minutes later. And then she doubles down on it. Like, I forget how she gets on him the second time, but she's, 2-3 knuckles deep in his nose. No idea why this ghost has got such an infatuation with shoving her finger up his nose. I know, the finger his finger turns into a big part of how they end this story or end this movie anyway. But every time that finger starts climbing up the nose, I just started laughing every time.
I was going to bring it up before and you mentioned it. There's a lot. It's kind of like we talked about with Long Legs a couple of weeks ago, where in Long Legs, they kind of leave a lot of negative space. So things can happen in the background, but that don't necessarily happen. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. This kind of plays that same game, but there's not so much of the negative space. But I guess maybe there is, because the way that they frame him, he's like in a bottom corner, or he's like...
It's the way they light him.
Yeah.
More so.
It's very dark behind him.
Like I just had when I turned the light off down here.
Ooh, spooky.
Oh, right.
I like the audience interaction. I like how, as the movie progresses, he's trying to figure out, or the audience is trying to figure out things that have happened, or like there's a symbol, a Hamza in the background. There's a scene in particular where there's this guy, you don't see him, but he's like, Grandma, this guy, he's at this house, and she starts telling, she's like, I was at that house, and she starts telling the story, and he's like, lady, I don't have all this time. Can you hurry up? And he's like double speeding the video to try to get to the point she's making.
I love how she goes, oh, he broke that thing. She goes, oh, he's fucked, or something like that. I thought that was pretty good.
Oh, the Hamza should be keeping Mildred away. And the guy off camera's like, well, he ended up breaking that. She's like, oh, he's fucking dead, or whatever she said. Something, some kindly like old woman is just like,
oh, you're fine, announcing
his demise.
Yeah. I like the way that he interacts with the audience too, because again, feels like really clever writing for this movie to me, though, because it's this movie's only got like a 85-90 minute runtime. Like, it's a fairly short movie. And by putting stuff like that in there where you can have the audience explain things, an audience that can put in this video that he's fast forwarding through, you could take all this like long form storytelling and condense it into like a TikTok version of like, this is what's happening right now in 20 seconds. And then we're on to the next scare or gag or, whatever, that type of thing. So it's, like I said, to me, it's good because the interactions are almost always entertaining, because he's either trying to figure out how to make his stream better, saying something stupid, or being told that he's about to die. Those are the three like general things that he gets from this live stream. But by doing that, again, it kind of moves the story along at a much quicker pace, but it also fills in, I'm sure there's plot holes in this I didn't think about yet, but it fills in a lot of the gaps of the major plot holes and makes it make enough sense to kind of give him some lifelines that he might be able to find a way out, some ways to kind of piece the story together, and a clever way to do it without being like, this guy is some genius that just figured it out. Like, no, this guy's a dumbass who happened to have people who are smarter than him that helped him.
He's getting a lot of crowdsourcing.
Right. Any highlights that you want to talk about, or is there any lowlights that you want to hit on? I don't have a whole lot of lowlights for this one, so if you have any that you want to highlight, or lowlight, I guess.
Well, I think I have one of my biggest takeaways on the negative side is, and it's not necessarily a negative, but I just want to say, like, a lot of the scares that happen in this movie are because tension gets built, and it's jump scare aplenty. But I don't know how else you would do that. And being in a situation like that, if you were to put yourself in that character's shoes, you know, because you're kind of seeing it like the audience is seeing it, you're going to get scared like this. You know what I'm saying? You're going to be scared by jump scares because you don't know what's coming around the corner. And that's how all that tension gets released. You know, all the tension gets built with him slowly walking through the house and going in different rooms where he thinks he's seen a ghost go into or something along those lines. And there's a jump scare. And that's how the audience gets those scares and those frights too. I don't know another way that you could do it. I'm not the biggest fan of jump scares, but I think in this particular movie, the way that it's done, because they're set up this specific way, it's very tolerable for me. Like I'm not a big jump scare fan, but this helps. This helps with that. The other thing is like, I like when this movie starts to, when the ghosts come into the picture, it starts to cross that. You get like a very strong Evil Dead vibe. And I'm glad that you thought that too. Like when I started, I'm reading my notes, I'm like, oh, this is Evil Dead. Like we're starting to get the Evil Dead territory big time.
To be perfectly honest, if you had called, like if this movie was what we got as the next, if this was Evil Dead 4 or whatever they want to call it, I would have been more happy with this being the Evil Dead movie, like the Evil Dead, part of the Evil Dead franchise, and what we've gotten with 2013 and Evil Dead Rise, which are both fine in their own right. But this, with the exception of not having Bruce Campbell in it, this feels like an Evil Dead movie to me because you got your undead things being comically like slapsticky with your buffoon character. It very much so feels like a spiritual successor to Evil Dead. And again, if you had just called this Evil Dead 4 or Evil Dead Reboot or whatever you wanted to call it, I would have been perfectly content with it. And I still would have felt the same that I wouldn't like it more than those other ones that I love, but this feels right at home in that type of universe to me.
And I feel like if they were to do something like that, they would have to rub a little bit more dirt on it. Like it have to be, this is almost clinically clean. This is almost too clean.
And it would almost have to have him become a little bit more of the bravado hero at the end of it than what he does. Like he does kind of turn into the hero of sorts because, I mean, I guess the very end kind of leaves it up to your imagination. But for the most part, he gets out of the situation, you know, kind of.
Yeah. As much as it can be expected.
Right. About as much as what you would get from an Evil Dead movie, really. But he never turns into full on like Ash where he's like, it's go time. Well, I guess he kind of does. He never, with Ash, like Ash goes and arms himself and like hacks his hand off with a chain and puts a chainsaw on it. Like it turns into a video game by the end of Evil Dead 2. Even though he gets his like, you know, I'm going to grow some balls and I'm going to go fight back type of thing because he kind of feels like he's going to die either way.
Yeah,
so he might
has
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once he kind of gets to that point, it still stays grounded in the sense that he doesn't do anything that is, I was going to say something that is theoretically impossible, except for the fact that he's doing it to ghosts. So I guess the whole thing is theoretically impossible. But like it's grounded in the sense that like if these ghosts were there, like anything that he does, theoretically, he could hit him with, what was it, a hammer or something like that he finds or something along those lines. So he doesn't like produce like a magic, you know, bodily controlled chainsaw that's attached to like as an appendage or anything like that. I'd like to see a blooper reel for this movie. I think that could be fun. Like whatever's on the cutting room floor that just kind of was somehow too stupid or too scary to make this movie. I'm pretty happy with what we got, but having just like one or two more like over the top gore scenes would have been fine with me too. So
yeah, the movie feels it's rated R, right? I mean, but it feels like,
I believe so.
It feels almost like on the verge. Oh, it's not rated, actually. So that makes a little bit more sense. It almost feels
also
like
it's done a lot more with it not being rated, but
well, I think it just
I'm sure budget has something to do with it.
It probably just didn't get submitted for rating, and probably because it's a Shudder original, they didn't have to. But I feel like it's almost like a bit of an edgy PG-13 or a low grade R. And it feels like they could have went so much further, but it's probably, you know, budgetary constraints, just things that they couldn't do to the quality that they wanted to. And, you know, I mean, we get like meat cleavers to the head and appendages being cut off and all this other crazy stuff. So it's not like it doesn't do anything. We get the holy water in the head and that blows the pus-filled thing all over his face that he never wipes off. He gets a bucket full of urine dumped in his mouth and all this other stuff.
It's water poured with his own piss.
Yeah,
that's right.
So, I mean, they do go to some extremes, but I feel like with maybe the comedy helps bring that R down a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to say.
It does definitely lighten the mood of the whole thing.
And it makes it more fun.
It does. Absolutely. And you know what else is fun? I think it's hot dog time.
Then you're in for a big treat, bro. Because it's hot dog time.
Kick us off this week. Fire up the grill, Sean.
All right. Well, I'll admit, as we mentioned before, when the movie started, I didn't think I was really going to enjoy it because Sean is just this, besides having a horrible name, he is just the douchiest YouTuber, live streamer. I mean, we're just so inundated these days with kind of douchey people like that. But as the movie went along, I think I changed my mind because not only did it have those elements of horror, but it also got funnier. The more time you spend with the character, the funnier he kind of gets because he's just so outrageously cowardly. He's such a coward, but it's understandable. He's understandably a coward. Like I said, I think it clearly took inspiration from Evil Dead, but I feel like that he's not Ash, but it added to the charm of the movie in the end. I thought, like me personally, I thought it was a fresh take on FPV movies and found footage horror just in general, with those equal parts Evil Dead and had a lot of Scooby-Doo to it too. And we love Scooby-Doo on this show. And it's a good descriptor as well. I got to give Deadstream 7 jagged fingernails out of 11 hot dogs.
Whose hot dog is this? Huh? Is it yours?
Again, this was obviously my pick, one of my picks for the month. I think I picked this whole month, but I definitely picked this one. I mentioned early in the year that I wanted to cover this at some point. We just kept pushing it back. The first time I watched this movie, I went into it with low expectations, not really knowing much about it, other than it was a movie about this guy live streaming some shit. I came out of it and was immediately like, oh, this is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this and kind of spent a couple days like, this is cool. They did this, that, whatever. And then I kind of was like, this really feels like an Evil Dead movie in a lot of ways, just without the chainsaw, basically. When I went back and watched it the second time, knowing what I was getting into, knowing like not to be too annoyed by this character that's annoying because you know where it's going to go with it, I just found it to be fun. And like, it's, you know, this movie is not only at home with the Evil Dead movies, it's at home with movies like, think like Return of the Living Dead and Shaun of the Dead and these great like comedy horror movies or horror comedy movies, however you want to word it. It's one of the few movies that I can think of that takes those two genres and seamlessly puts them together, which really lends to a really rewatchable movie at the end of the day, because it's not only, it kind of scratches both those itches. Like I want to watch something gory and stupid, but I also want to watch something stupid and funny. It checks all the boxes. The character of Sean, although he's a doofus, he's a likable doofus. And I do like him more the second time around than I did the first time around, because you're just you're in on the joke more so by that point. And everything looks pretty good in this movie. For some, like there's a lot more practical effects in this than there are computer effects. The practical effects that are in there, are they the same as you would get from like Sfini or Nicotero? No, but they don't have to be. Like, this isn't the show to demand that level for everything. They work for this movie and the story that they told, and I think they look pretty damn good for the most part. And I think the fact that they went with a more practical effect will actually help this movie in the long run. I think when we go back to this movie in 10 years, it's still going to look a lot better than if it was all computer effects through the whole thing. So I think they pretty much nailed it. For me, this is a really solid, like 8 nostril flared and bloody fingernails out of 10 100-year-old hot dogs rotting in a cellar. It's just a lot of fun. It's one of those movies that's pretty accessible. And honestly, if you like pretty much any of the stuff that we talk about from a horror movie perspective, and you haven't seen this is one that you should probably put on your list sooner than later. As far as like new horror movies go, this is one of the better ones that's come out in the last 5 years. So this week's question of the week is pretty straight to the point. Is, do you have a favorite FPV, first person view, for whatever, view. FPV, shot on view, first person view,
shot on view,
shot on view.
It's not first person
found
video.
Footage,
I
whatever.
guess it could be first person video.
Favorite FPV movie. So we're going to start over on Twitter or X, because that's what I have up right now. And our first response is from Gareth over at Video Tasties. He's also a member of the You Run Podcast Network. You'll find him at yourunpodcast.com. And he says, I saw Cold Ground this week, and that was a movie that I quite enjoyed. I don't even know what that is. Have you seen that one?
Mm-mm. I haven't.
Okay. Well, Gareth usually has pretty good taste in film, so I'm going to go ahead and add that to the to watch list. This is actually on Instagram. This is not Twitter. They just look the same now for whatever reason. So over on Instagram, Average Drewski says, it's only for a few minutes, but I always like the FPV view in Doom. for purely nostalgic reasons. That scene has come up more times than I can even believe.
Mostly by you.
And we've never even talked about that movie at length on this fucking show.
No.
One of these days.
Someday.
So Attack of the Killer Objects says the Maniac remake with Elijah Wood. I don't think I've seen the remake. I remember the original, but I didn't realize the remake was all like first person point of view on that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I'm finding out there are a lot more FPV movies than I thought that there were.
Well, I think this also kind of goes to what I said. Like, I'm starting to blur the lines between found footage and a movie that's shot from a point of view. Like, I don't know that the two are, I almost feel like they're two different things now, but I digress. Friend Justin over at Pop Culture Reflections Podcast, another You Run podcast member, said, this may be unoriginal, but for me, it's going to be the Blair Witch Project. It's one of my favorite horror films, and it's fucking brilliant. It's not one of my favorite horror films, but I do think it's a brilliant film because it did something that no one else did before it, at least not successfully. And then, I don't even know what this is. So lastly, it's all blurring together. This is the problem. Lastly, over on Instagram, we have TFTC Pod, who says, the scenes from Requiem for a Dream. I don't remember those scenes. I don't want to remember those scenes. That movie is more of a horror movie than any horror movie that we've ever discussed. Now we'll go over to X. And Newman over at Movies for Days also says Maniac with Elijah Wood is a good FPV movie. He's another You Run Podcast member. You can check him out at yourunpodcast.com. Sticking with the theme of You Run Podcast Network members, we have Boomer over at Podcast in the Woods, and he's saying their favorite, both him and Gabby, love Hell House LLC. You've been threatened with that movie before because there's a clown in it. One of these days, we'll get around to that too.
I've heard.
Let's see. Skipping around to stick with the You Run Podcast Network theme, Scott from the You Run Podcast Network says Deadstream hands down for something newer. Old school is very obviously the Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. And then piggybacking on the Deadstream theme is our friends over at Dissect That Film. They say Deadstream is a recent one that I really enjoyed. Lastly, we'll head over to Facebook, where our friend Evan says Hardcore Henry is pretty good. The FPS portion of Doom was notable to mention, even though it's only for a minute or two. For horror, though, it'd be Hell House LLC, hands down.
Hands down. Definitive.
Hands down.
With authority.
Hell House is a pretty good found footage movie. I'll give it that. And it still feels like that found footage, closer to like that Blair Witch style found footage than what this is. Sean, do you have an answer for this FPV question?
I mean, for me, it's going to be Blair Witch. And I know that had a bit of a stink on it for reasons that we've mentioned over and over and over again. And I've always mentioned, like, when I saw it in the theater, I knew it was not a real thing, but everybody in the audience thought that was like one of the scariest movies they had seen because they thought it was real. But I think I kind of got turned off to the whole thing for a long time because, as with any wildly successful movie, there's always shit tons of copycats. You know, think of when Pulp Fiction came out and you couldn't escape the nonlinear story in movies for like 15 years afterwards. It seemed like it was every other movie was
still feel like you can't escape it.
Well, maybe that's true. It felt like everything was nonlinear. So yeah, for me, I think it's just Blair Witch, just because sometimes the first time is the best time, you know, or at least that's how you remember it. Rose-colored glasses and all that shit.
I mean, for me, like, if I'm just associating FPV with found footage style stuff, then it's going to be Deadstream and Late Night with the Devil are the two that I really enjoyed. And they're both newer that we've seen in the last year or two. It's not my favorite style of film making, so I can't think of a lot really past that. Any of the ones that have been mentioned, like that I've seen, I'm a fan of it. I'm just going to leave it at that. Hardcore Henry, here we come.
I feel like it's hard to find good ones because, like we said, there are so many out there, and there are so many that you don't even know about. It's hard to really get into.
And I really do feel like the line between what apparently is FPV and not the internet version of FPV, like apparently there's a film version of this too, not just a, you know, anyway.
Okay.
It's a Pornhub thing, apparently, from what I'm told.
Oh, I know.
Yes.
Dig your own hole, John. Don't bring me into this.
No, you're going down low. Anyway, I do feel like there's a really blurred line between what's found footage, what's FPV. Is found footage its own genre still, or is its own
I think
style?
so. I think FPV and found footage are distinctly different.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. FPV is first person. Found footage is, this is a heinous crime has happened and we found this footage and it was all put together and we're going to present it to you as fact.
I mean, couldn't found footage in theory be like a good thing happened and we just happen to have cameras rolling?
Yeah, like the Hindenburg. Found footage.
Or
Good thing
alive.
happened. Yeah, there you go. There you go. But they would have had to have a video camera or a self. Actually, now that saying it out loud, like with the age of cell phones, both of them can be, I could see how they could go hand in hand.
No, see?
I mean, you're recovering video footage from a phone and you put it together as a movie and it was all in first person.
This is us eating Charlie. He died first, so we're going to eat him now so the rest of us can live.
His ass is delicious. So juicy. Got that juicy booty.
It's a good thing there was still some barbecue sauce from the plane crash. I think that's all we got for this week. So we're going to be back next week as Horrorween continues, cannibalism and all, whether it's horror movie cannibalism or just documentary style cannibalism, whatever.
Real life cannibalism.
Cannibalism is, it's a thing. With that in mind, between bites of Charlie, we're going to ask that you take a minute to follow us. We would appreciate that.
The damn Charlie bit my finger.
Fucking Charlie. I thought he was dead and he's still biting back. Cannibalism aside, please give us a follow. We're at Dewey Pod Monster on all the social media networks. You can find all of our shows at our site, which is crap.town. You can also leave us feedback there. Or if you don't want to go to our site, you can go to yourunpodcast.com. All of our episodes are on there, as well as all the other great shows at You Run Podcast. Please go check them out. Sean, what else is going on?
Well, I was going to say, if you want your answer to the question of the week read on this show, first off, you have to know what the question of the week is. And to find that out, you have to follow us on social media. You can follow us on all the social medias that matter at Dewey Pod Monster. Also, wanted to say every single individual thing that we talk about on this show is linked in the show notes. So if you ever listen to what we're talking about and you're like, how do I watch that thing? It'll be linked in the show notes. I spend a lot of time linking those things in the show notes. Some of those links could be affiliate links. And if you click any of those and purchase shit through them, especially if it's Amazon, we might get a couple nickels or pennies or stuff that's smaller than a penny. And if you want to find out about my craft beer adventures in the state of Michigan, you can follow me on all the social media networks at Draft Therapy or follow me on YouTube at youtube.drafttherapy.com.
Anyway, we'll be back next week. Horrorween continues. We're going to be talking about more horror movies. It's October. Happy Halloween. We will see you next week. Cheers. The people that have given this enough praise to get it a 91% on the tomato meter have never seen a horror movie before. Looks like it was made with party scissors. I can't fucking read, apparently. What else is new? So this week's question of the week is pretty straight to the point. Is do you have whatever.